Hello, everybody. My name is Tawfik Hamid, and this message is essentially for my fellow Muslims. However, I would like everyone who is interested in the topic to hear or listen to it. Let me start with the topic. The topic is how to end Islamophobia. The word Islamophobia has been used repeatedly in the media here and there. Many people are complaining of Islamophobia and they want to end it. Let us see how Islamophobia could be ended. First of all, let us discuss the most important part of the expression, the word phobia itself. Phobia is defined in psychiatry and psychology books, and I am basically a medical doctor, by the way, is defined as irrational fear of something. So it has to be irrational. Someone going just in an aeroplane or a car, or so scared of a small insect, for example, that will not harm him or her. This is called phobia. It's irrational belief, fear of something. But when something is rational, then it shouldn't be called phobia. For example, if when we see the percentage of terror acts all over the world, when people see terrorism, it's almost all of the terror acts in the world conducted by Muslim groups. You see here in the Muslim world, for example, the map, it's all Muslim countries that the highest rate of terrorism. Either the red or the brown color, they are just different shades of high risk or less risk. But the highest level of terrorism is in the Islamic countries conducted by Islamic groups or groups that call themselves Islamic. Let me add something very important also. When we see traditional teaching of Sharia, teaching what I call the ABC's test for radical Islam. And these are the values that are taught and unchallenged in Sharia books. A, B, C, D, F, G. A for apostate killing. B for beating women and stoning them to death for adultery, for example. C, calling Jews pigs and monkeys. D, declaration of war on non-Muslims to spread Islam, after offering non-Muslims one of three options, Islam or pay humiliating tax called jizya, or they will be killed, like what ISIS is doing today. This is part of traditional Sharia that is taught today. It is taught today in Islamic books. Enslavement of female war prisoners and raping them, like what's happening with the Yazidi women by ISIS, for example. Fighting Jews before end days and killing all of them. This is one of the mainstream teaching in many mosques in the Middle East and the Muslim world. And gay killing. I think if someone argue about these issues and said this is not Islam, this has nothing to do with Islam, they have to prove their point of view. The following are the sources of Sharia law. If we went to any Sharia a book and analyze the sources of Sharia, it's well known to be the following sources: either the Quran and its interpretations, the hadiths of Prophet Muhammad, or the so-called Sunnah, which actions of the disciples of the Prophet, the actions of the disciples who are called the Sahaba, and the four schools of Islamic jurisprudence. So we have actually 5 or 4 main sources of Sharia: Quran and the commentaries on the Quran, and the Hadith or Sunnah books, actions of the disciples, and the 4 schools of Islamic jurisprudence. When someone, for example, says the killing of the apostates is not in the Quran, that's absolutely correct. And people who believe in this are great, that they shouldn't kill apostates. However, the commentaries of the Quran or the tafsir and interpretations unfortunately justifies killing apostates. And more than this, for example, if we went to verse 929 of Surah Al-Tawbah, this verse was talking about war situations, but I cannot find one single exception. I went to 25 Quran interpretations, commentaries available on the internet and in Western countries to find one single interpretation that interprets this verse in a different way than its very literal understanding. This verse they use to justify what ISIS is doing, declaring wars on non-Muslims and offering them Islam or jizya or to be killed, and taking their women as sex slaves. This verse has been used throughout Islamic history to spread Islam in North Africa. But that is not the problem. We have violent verses. There are many violent verses in, for example, the Old Testament. But the current rabbis and the current leaders of the Christian faith clearly and unambiguously can stand against applying such violent principles in our modern times. But today, the Islamic teaching still includes these values as mainstream values that's being taught in all Quranic interpretations. For example, when we go to this verse, Surah 9, verse 29. Please prove me wrong. That is the only way to show that I am wrong, is to prove me wrong by bringing one Quranic interpretation that's approved by the leading Islamic scholars and clearly interprets such verse in a different way. Unfortunately, this interpretation does not exist. There is only one, which is the modern interpretation of the Quran that I authored a couple of years ago, and it's still not approved. It's not the mainstream. Let us talk about the mainstream interpretations. We go to Sunnah books, for example. All the values that I mentioned earlier, the apostate killing, beating women, calling Jews pigs and monkeys, declaring wars to spread the religion, enslavement of female prisoners and raping them. All of this is clearly stated and justified in the Sunnah books. That's like Al-Bukhari and Muslim, the Hadith books, not in the Quran, or not all of them at least in the Quran. Islamic jurisprudence books. These are three famous worldwide books used by many Muslims as sources for Islamic jurisprudence, which is the way the religion is understood by the scholars. We have Minhaj al-Muslim. I bought this book here in the United States. Also, Fiqh al-Sunnah is worldwide distributed book, and other books of fiqh, which is the jurisprudence. All of them with no single exception. And you can go and buy them from any Islamic bookstore on the shelves, or can go on the internet and buy these books and read them. You don't need really to go to any view or opinion. You just go to the main source and see if there is a single Islamic jurisprudence books that stand clearly and unambiguously against these ABCs that I mentioned earlier. Then I can be wrong, and everyone who have fear of these forms of teaching can be considered wrong. But as long as the mainstream fiqh or jurisprudence books teaches the ABCs, teaching these violent principles, then the Islamic scholars must provide other books that teaches something different and opposing to the ABCs, so that they can go and claim to the world that Islam is the religion of peace. Similarly, the actions of the Sahaba, when you go to the history of the Islamic history written by the Islamic world itself, it's full of the Sahaba or disciples taking concubines, taking women as female war prisoners, giving them to one another, as what ISIS is doing today exactly. But again, the problem is that not in the existence of such teaching, but in the lack of opposing teaching that's approved by the mainstream Islamic scholars. Let me be very clear on that, on this question. When Islamophobia will disappear? Many people wonder when Islamophobia will disappear. These people need to ask one question first. Why we don't see Buddhophobia and Hinduphobia and Baha'i-phobia, for example, against the Buddhists, Hindus, and the Baha'i, for example, people who follow Baha'i faith? Why there is no phobia? Simply because these people do not teach such principles today, simply because these people do not conduct terrorist acts all over the world at such level with such percentage, and that is the reason why people have phobia from Islam. The reason is simple. Statistics show that there is higher percentage among Islamic groups to do terrible terrorist acts. And this is justifiable by many Islamic scholars and many Islamic books that are unchallenged and not opposed. So that is the core of the problem. when the world see women demonstrating like this, Muslim women demonstrating like this against Charlie Hebdo cartoons, for example, in France, and when they see people demonstrating also against any insult to Prophet Muhammad in this way and with such passion, when they see them demonstrated after the cartoon of the Danish cartoons in such barbaric and violent way, when they see them demonstrating for the hijab or against banning of the hijab in France with such passion, I'll tell you honestly, Islamophobia will disappear only when the world see the Muslim world demonstrating with such passion like this girl, but not against insulting the Prophet and not against the cartoons, but against stoning of women to death, against killing apostates just because they want to convert from Islam to other faith, against beating women, against killing gays, against the enslavement of female war prisoners. This is a Yazidi young girl that's in tears because ISIS is implementing Sharia rules. How many, let me ask a question, how many Islamic scholars can stand up and say that these values are unacceptable? Stoning of women, killing apostates, beating of women, killing gays, what ISIS is doing of enslavement female war prisoners and raping them. This is going to be a sex slave soon, forced on sex with a man she hates just because he took her in war. And this man is not created things on his own. He's implementing what is written in the mainstream books. That is the problem again. So, the only way to stop Islamophobia, believe me, is when the world see the Muslim world demonstrating against stoning, against killing apostates, against violence against women, against killing gays, and against the enslavement of female war prisoners and raping them. How many times we have seen the Muslim world demonstrating against these things? They demonstrated against France for banning the hijab, against the cartoon that insulted Prophet Muhammad. But we have not seen them demonstrating with such passion against the terrorists or against the such barbaric values. I'll tell you honestly, Islamophobia will be ended when the Islamic scholars are also when the Islamic scholars issues clear declaration that stands against these ABCs that I mentioned earlier: killing apostate, beating women, stoning women to death, enslavement of female war prisoners and raping them, and all such barbaric values. When these scholars stand clearly and say Jews are not pigs and monkeys, for example, but as long as these scholars are silent against these barbaric values, then don't expect anything but Islamophobia. Islamophobia will be ended when the leading scholars in Friday prayers, for example, go and stand and instead of complaining of Islamophobia, declaring to the whole world that we no longer accept killing apostates. Stoning of women is wrong. Enslavement of female war prisoners and raping them is unacceptable and evil. When they say Jews are not pigs and monkeys, when they say that the principle that Muslims must declare jihad on non-Muslims and offer them three options, either to convert to Islam or pay humiliating tax called jizya or we will kill you, when these scholars say that this principle is unacceptable and they provide different interpretations for the Quran or for the Islamic teaching, then and only then Islamophobia will be ended. Last, I'm using this to start a new era, to invite all the Muslim world, Islamic scholars, to come up with a clear declaration standing against these ABCs. If they were truly moderates, if Islam really does not teach this, they should be able to provide reference books to support their views, or at least they should be able to stand in mosques to say this in public in Friday prayers, or put this on YouTube's or on their websites. So I'm inviting the Islamic scholars in America, in Europe, all over the world, next Friday prayer to stand up and denounce these ABCs. As simple as that. And then Islamophobia will start to decline. But before doing this, they don't expect anything but more Islamophobia. And also, people in the West can easily go to their local mosques and ask them if they are truly moderates, let them denounce these ABCs. The moment they do this, Islamophobia will start to go down. So finally, this is just a short summary of a big article that I wrote one day in the Wall Street Journal, but this is just a summary of it. And I wrote this years ago, and I said how to end Islamophobia. We don't see Buddhophobia, we don't see Hinduphobia. We see, or the world see, Islamophobia for one reason. And this reason can be solved only by the hands of my fellow Muslims. So I encourage you, my fellow Muslims, to start to prove to the world that Islam is peaceful by demonstrating against these violent principles when you see them conducted in the Sharia-controlled countries, by issuing fatwas or books, writing books to clearly denounce these ABCs. And when you do this, believe me, the world will start to change and Islamophobia will be ended. But as long as this is the mainstream teaching, and as long as Islamic scholars are silent against this, and as long as the Muslim world demonstrates against the cartoons but not against the stoning, then Islamophobia will not be ended and will only increase. I hope you all the best, and I hope more peace comes to the world. Thank you.